If you're ready, Amaroq, we'd like to introduce Amaroq Weiss. She has she's going to do a talk called Wolf Activism, an expression of our deeper selves. Amaroq has worked in wolf conservation for more than 20 years and is the West Coast Wolf Advocate for the Center for Biological Diversity, a national nonprofit conservation organization with more than 1.5 million members, an online activist dedicated to the protection of endangered species and wild places. A biologist and a former attorney, she focuses on wolf recovery and protections in Washington, Oregon, and California, the Northern Rockies, and at a federal level. Previously, she has worked with the Mexican Wolf Conservation Fund, Defenders of Wildlife, and the California Wolf Center on Wolf Conservation Policy, litigation strategy, and on-the-ground efforts. Amaroq was a stakeholder advisor to Oregon and California state wildlife agencies as they developed their state wolf conservation and management plans. And successfully argued that the Center for Biological Diversity's petition to get the wolf listed under California's Endangered Species Act. Amaroq lives in Penultimate, California with her husband Terry and their two wondrous and bossy Siberian Huskies, Miranda and Tega. Sorry, again.
In this refulgent summer, it has been a luxury to draw the breath of life. 181 years ago, Ralph Waldo Emerson began a speech with these words, and then he continued. The grass grows, the buds burst, the meadow is spotted with fire and gold in the tint of flowers. The air is full of birds, and sweet with the breath of the pine, the balm of Gilead, and the new hay. Night brings no gloom to the heart with its welcome shade. Through the transparent darkness, the stars pour their almost spiritual rays. Man under them seems a young child, and his huge globe a toy. The cool night bathes the world as with a river, and prepares his eyes again for the crimson dawn. The mysteries of nature was never more happily displayed. 181 years of additional environmental despoliation later, we still know what Emerson is talking about. Nature and its wonders shape the essence of who we are. Our activism on behalf of wolves is one way we give voice to our profound part of our lives. All these marvels are you, and because they are you, the advocacy for wolves is an expression of you. Our love of the wild is not something we use as a reason to advocate for wolves. Rather, advocating for wolves is a pure expression of our profound connection to the world. That pure expression of our profound connection, multiplied by thousands and millions of voices, results in changes in laws and culture, and in 1995 to the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park. When Europeans arrived here, an estimated 2 million wolves ranged across all of North America. 2 million wolves. Wolves would soon fall victim to manifest destiny, the philosophy that drove 19th century U.S. territorial expansion. Manifest destiny held that the United States was destined, by God its advocates believed, to expand its dominion and to spread democracy and capitalism across the entire North American continent. It caused the dislocation, brutal mistreatment, and slaughter of First Nation, Hispanic, and other non-European occupants of the territories, and the brutal slaughter of native wildlife, especially wolves. The campaign to eradicate wolves was nearly complete in 1940. All that was left was a tiny population in far northeastern Minnesota. 300 years of power and momentum nearly wiped out entire populations of native grizzly bears, bison, and wolves. 300 years of barbarianism. But the world changed. The momentum of the slaughter slowed and halted, and at times reversed directions. In Yellowstone National Park, the wolf was restored. I'll show you a brief video to celebrate what an extraordinary event that was.
A century ago, predators were seen as the enemy of progress. Eliminated from nearly all of their former range. Scientists had not yet discovered that an ecosystem cannot thrive without both prey and predator. In 1926, park rangers shot Yellowstone's last wolf. No one understood the consequences. 70 years later, in the winter of 1995, 2 horse-drawn sleighs carried 15 gray wolves captured in Canada and released them in the Yellowstone backcountry. It was the beginning of one of the most ambitious restoration projects in history. No one knew if the wolves would stay, if they could thrive in an unfamiliar place, or what the long-term effects of their presence would bring to the Yellowstone ecosystem. But it didn't take long for the wolves to make Yellowstone their home. The revival of the hunt returned the most primary dynamic to Yellowstone. A predator pursuing its prey. Thanks to the return of the wolf, the world's first national park is now recognized as one of the only intact ecosystems of its kind.
In the 1960s and 1970s, there was a huge upheaval in human consciousness. It manifested itself in the environmental movement. The free speech movement, the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, which has continued forward into the marriage equality and LGBTQ rights movements, the women's reproductive freedom movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, the livable wage movement, the Keep It in the Ground movement, and so much more. Go forward. In the 1960s and 1970s, the environmental movement led to the enactment of some of the most profound environmental protection laws in the world, including the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and most importantly for wolves, the Federal Endangered Species Act. The listing of the gray wolf under the Endangered Species Act resulted in the outlawing of killing of wolves and a requirement that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service develop recovery plans for the gray wolf. These protections allowed the remnant population of wolves in Minnesota to increase in number and expand their territory into neighboring western Great Lakes states, and today there are around 4,000 wolves in Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin combined. The reintroduction of 66 wolves to Yellowstone National Park in central Idaho has blossomed into the existence of around 1,500 wolves in the northern Rocky states and another 280 or so wolves in Oregon, Washington, and California. And in the Southwest, the reintroduction there of an initial 11 Mexican gray wolves and subsequent releases has resulted in a population of around 130 animals in the wild. In the lower 48 United States today, there are around 6,000 gray wolves. A few days ago, we got to see and hear some of the newest members of the wolf community in a trail cam video that was filmed June 19th in Lassen County, California. These movements changed history, and they changed the laws, and they're still doing so. And although these movements slowed and at times diminished the forces behind Manifest Destiny, they did not eliminate those destructive forces. While our most profound environmental laws were passed during the administration of Republican President Richard Nixon, during the same period, there was also a cultural backlash because the other side had never gone away. Before he was appointed by Nixon to the U.S. Supreme Court, Lewis F. Powell Jr. was the attorney for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And during these times of social upheaval, Powell wrote a memo in 1971 that recommended a template for fighting back. His plan was to dismantle the changes that had been effected by the liberal Warren Court. His memo started all of the right-wing think tanks that now exist. The Heritage Foundation, the Manhattan Institute, the Cato Institute, the Citizens for a Sound Economy, Accuracy in Academia, and others. And he suggested that billionaires like the Koch brothers and the Walton brothers fund these think tanks. His memo, which is often referred to as the Powell Manifesto, embodies the fact that the right wing was disorganized and needed to remedy that flaw. His memo said to the business world, organize and fight back. We have not eliminated these core forces in opposition. For over 50 years, the opposition has organized and fought back, bought influence with billions of dollars, flooded the airwaves with their messages, and flexed their muscles in every aspect of our society. Now, who exactly are they? Those who view and use the planet as all of its resources as the disposable means to a profit. So first there is the livestock industry, comprised of the National Cattle and Beef Association, the American Farm Bureau Federation, the American Sheep Industry Association, and these same industry representatives at the state and county levels. They want to keep Americans eating meat. They want to retain access to grazing permits on public lands at rock bottom prices. And they want to have wolves and other native wildlife killed on their behalf at taxpayer expense. Which brings us to U.S. Department of Agriculture, and especially a program within that department called Wildlife Services, which each year kills millions of native wildlife on behalf of the livestock industry, but also claims as victims non-target species, including domestic pets like dogs and cats, and imperiled species, endangered and threatened species, and even sometimes humans. Then there is the sports hunting industry and the gun lobby. This includes the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Safari Club International, Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, Foundation for Wildlife Management, and the National Rifle Association, all of whom view gun ownership and hunting as a constitutional right and want to trophy hunt wolves. There is the oil and gas industry, Exxon and Chevron and the rest. They want access to public lands with unfettered ability to drill, mine, and profit from those lands that were taken from First Nations, sacred lands which would be defiled by the actions of this industry. Then there are the state agency associations, like the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which is comprised of agencies from 24 states and Canadian provinces. Together, they manage wildlife on lands covering nearly 3.7 million square miles of some of North America's most wild and scenic country. This encompasses more than 40% of North America, including 2/3 of the United States. Next, there are the governors' associations, like the Western Governors Association, which is comprised of 19 Western states plus 3 U.S. territories. Now, both the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and the Western Governors Associations have taken very questionable policy stances when it comes to wildlife conservation and healthy environments, prioritizing instead rural economies, states' rights, and the desires of industry profiteers. Then we come to ALEC, or the American Legislative Exchange Council. This is how ALEC describes itself. The American Legislative Exchange Council is America's largest nonpartisan voluntary membership organization of state legislators, dedicated to the principles of limited government, free markets, and federalism. It is comprised of nearly 1/4 of the country's state legislators. What that description fails to divulge is that ALEC's membership is also comprised of corporate representatives and corporate lobbyists. In fact, more than 98% of ALEC's revenues come from corporations, corporate trade groups, and corporate foundations. These conservative state legislators and private sector representatives draft and share model state-level legislation, including on wildlife issues, for distribution among the state governments in the United States. Regarding ALEC, the Center for Media and Democracy writes, these so-called model bills reach into almost every area of American life and often directly benefit huge corporations. Participating legislators, overwhelmingly conservative Republicans, then bring those proposals home and introduce them in state houses across the land as their own brilliant policy ideas and important public policy innovations without disclosing that corporations crafted and voted on the bills. That's who they are, the colossal forces of numerous national and international corporations, as well as national hunting, national animal agriculture industry associations, and the state agencies and politicians who unfailingly serve their interests. On the other side, the overwhelming majority of Americans in almost every region of the country firmly supports wildlife conservation and specifically the preservation and protection of wolves. It is not overly optimistic to assume that as long as sufficient numbers of citizens remain engaged and actively involved in the numerous campaigns to protect the wild in all of its shapes and forms throughout the country, the tide of events will continue to favor preservation over destruction, although the path forward will be uncertain and uneven. Yes, they have the outsized forces of corporations and large sums of money, but with this, they can only hold the tide. We are here today among the thousands and millions of voices who fight back, stand up, and demand that civilization and the planet be protected. Our individual life histories are different, but our universal experience and connection to the wild has propelled the following accomplishments. The passage of the Endangered Species Act in 1973 and the listing of the gray wolf for protection under the Act in 1974. Recovery plans for gray wolves developed in the northern western Great Lakes states and in the Southwest. Introductions of wolves to the Northern Rockies and the Southwest. Dispersal of those wolves from the Northern Rockies to Washington, Oregon, and California. Multiple successful court battles to prevent nationwide delisting or downlisting. Multiple successful court battles to prevent regional delisting. State wolf plans developed in Oregon, Washington, and California, which no matter what their flaws are still far more progressive than the wolf plans developed for the Northern Rockies or the Western Great Lakes. A state lawsuit in Oregon that resulted in greater protections for wolves in phase 1 of the plan, which really is a standard bearer for what we should be seeing in other state wolf plans. Getting the wolves listed under California's own State Endangered Species Act. And then just this last year, defeating a challenge to that listing by the agriculture industry that tried to overturn the California state listing. The reinstatement of a lawsuit in Oregon, challenging the state's premature delisting, despite the state's attempts to get that case mooted. State listing of wolves in Illinois. Overwhelming public and scientist opposition to federal delisting in 2013 that stopped that effort. And even more overwhelming public and scientist opposition to the new proposal that came out in 2019. And while all this is going on specific to wolves, other battles are being fought and over time won on issues which affect wolves, but which also affect other species like coyotes. For instance, as we heard earlier today, successfully outlawing wildlife or coyote killing contests in California, almost Arizona, just over the last step left, New Mexico, and almost in Oregon this year. We'll get it next year. Preventing the use of lethal traps and snares by wildlife services in California habitat that's been identified as suitable for wolves in Northern California. Ending contracts by multiple California counties with wildlife services. And then outlawing the use of predator killing devices called M44s in Oregon. In a country that was founded on slaughtering wolves and vast numbers of other wildlife through unspeakably brutal means over a 300+ year period history, these are profound victories with concrete results which are restoring and will continue to restore the fabric and vitality of the land. These are victories of which we should be proud, and which we must understand happen because thousands and thousands of people express their profound connection to the wild by relentlessly advocating for the wild. In the last few years, terror in the world has grown exponentially greater, but its aim remains essentially unchanged. Its aim remains the preservation of the global economy of violence and oligarchy, preservation of a grotesquely unequal distribution of wealth, and the human services and societal and cultural infrastructures that go with wealth. Its aim remains the perpetuation of the tragedies of unequal development. Its aim remains injustice. Confronted with this terror, you ask yourself, what am I doing here? I am here to organize. I am here to be political. I am here to be a citizen in a pluralist democracy. I am here to be effective, to have agency, to make a claim on power, to spread it around, to rearrange it, to democratize it, to legislate it into justice. Why you? Because the world will end if you don't act. You are the citizen of a flawed but actual democracy. Citizens are not actually capable of not acting. It is not given to a citizen that she doesn't act. This is the price you pay for being a citizen of a democracy. Your life is married to the political beyond the possibility of divorcement. You are always an agent. When you don't act, you act. When you don't vote, you vote. When you despair and fail to act, you open the door to evil. And evil is always happy to enter, sit down, wall off borderlands essential for the survival of wildlife and people seeking refuge from persecution, withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords, and eviscerate this country's environmental protection laws. Evil is happy refusing funds to American clinics overseas that counsel abortion, and evil is happy drilling for oil in Alaska. Evil is happy pinching pennies, while 40 million people worldwide suffer from political violence. And evil will sit there, carefully gulping down Big Macs and voraciously tweeting hatred and venom towards anyone who opposes him. Evil settles in, and it's a devil of a time getting him to vacate. Look at the White House. Look at Poland. Look at India, Israel, Venezuela, the Philippines. Look at Brazil. See what despair and inaction on the part of citizens produces. Act. Organize. It's boring, but do it. The world ends if you don't. Will the world end if you act? Will the world end anyway, even if you find an organization, stuff envelopes, give money, organize? Maybe, quite possibly. These are monstrous times and there's no telling. Look across the globe. When have you ever seen such a dismaying crew and occupation of every seat of power? A certifiable nutcase here, a tin pot dictator there, a feckless, blood-splattered plutocrat in this office, an unindicted war criminal in that office, miscreants, maniacs. And every one of them has the means of doing the most appalling damage. But hope isn't a choice. It's a moral obligation, a human obligation, an obligation to the cells in your body. Hope is a function of those cells. It's a bodily function the same as eating and breathing and sleeping. Hope is not naive. Hope grapples endlessly with despair. Real, vivid, powerful thunderclap hope, like the soul, is at home in darkness, is divided. Lose your hope and you lose your soul, and you don't want to do that, trust me, even if you haven't got a soul, and who knows, you shouldn't be careless about it. Will the world end if you act? Who can say? Will you lose your soul, your democratic citizen soul, if you don't act, if you don't organize? I guarantee it. Speak the truth, says Emerson, and all nature and all spirits help you with unexpected furtherance. Speak the truth, and all things alive or brute are vouchers, and the very roots of the grass underneath do seem to stir and move to bear you witness. Good is positive. Evil is merely privative. It is like cold, which is the privation of heat. All evil is so much death or non-entity. Benevolence is absolute and real. But speak the truth, and the world's time, space, eternity do seem to break out into joy. Emerson's words speak to all times and all places. The numerous successful campaigns over several decades on behalf of wolves are not diminished by temporary setbacks or defeats. Our dedication and activism for wolves is an expression of our profound connection to the natural world. It is our vision of a better world. Our passion and activism will keep that vision alive and ensure a future that more resembles our vision. The world is waiting for you. Organize. Speak the truth. For the last 5 minutes, some of my words have come almost verbatim, with a little modification on my part, from the greatest American playwright of the 20th century, Tony Kushner, who wrote Angels in America, amongst others. He delivered this clarion call to action as part of a commencement speech he gave in 2002. 17 years later, his words have even more import